Man-Made is a series looking into the journey of becoming a man, and not just any man, a good man. I've found those two words together bring up a very rich discussion. It is not a benign endeavor to seek these two questions. What does it mean to be a good man? And what are the pathways in becoming one? In this series, I'm talking with men from all walks of life, professions, locations, ages, races, political, and spiritual beliefs. This group of men crossed my path in different ways. Some I found, some men were recommended to me, and a few sought me out themselves. When it came time for the men to commit to the interview, I asked the men this: to only represent his experience, his beliefs, and his thoughts. And the hope is that collectively, all these interviews with these good men and their stories form a powerful story that takes us into a private view of what it's like to be a good man in this day and age. Welcome to Man-Made, my conversations with good men. Today's conversation is with Connor Beaton. I knew of Connor and his work with men, but didn't know the details of his journey of becoming a good man himself, nor the depth of his wisdom in working with men. I was impressed. He is a trained opera singer, worked many years in construction, studied Jungian psychology, speaks all over the world, is the founder of ManTalks, has a popular TEDx talk out there, worked at Apple, and is a very sought-after coach. I loved this conversation. Connor has found a really powerful place within the world of men and is helping men heal and expand and connect within themselves, to their families, and out in the world at epic levels and impressive rates. I had to stop myself several times from yelling, "Oh my God, yes!" and probably said, "Wow, that's a good point," too many times in this interview. Because Connor is the real deal. You will be inspired, impressed, and will walk away from this interview with your own view of this topic expanded. Meet Connor Beaton, a good man. Hi, this is Dr. Juliana, and I am thrilled to introduce you today to Connor Beaton. Hi, Connor.
Hi, thanks so much for having me.
I'm really excited. I've been looking forward to this for a while, and I'm really thrilled to have this conversation with you today.
Likewise.
So we haven't met yet. We just met a little bit ago, and you became a part of the series because somebody who knew you, who knew me, said you should do this.
Yeah. I think it was just like a Facebook tag. I get tagged in stuff on Facebook all the time, and then people are saying like, you should go on this podcast or do this interview, and usually, honestly, probably like 8 or 9 times out of 10, I'm like, it's not that like it's beneath me or anything like that. It's just that I have a very busy schedule, and so I'm pretty selective. But the more that I looked into your project, and the more that I looked into you and the work that you were doing, the more I was like, yeah, this is absolutely. I just got a good feeling about just the work that you're doing with men, and the work that you're doing with women as well, and just the intention behind this. So I definitely wanted to contribute to it. So hopefully it's impactful today.
Thank you. Thank you. So that actually means the world to me. Thank you very much. And thank you for taking a leap of faith.
Yeah.
This. So we'll get started. So tell us a little bit about you and who you are.
Yeah. So so I was born and raised in Alberta. For the non-Canadians that are out there, Alberta is like the Texas of Canada. It's
True.
it is. It really is. There's lots of oil. There's lots of big trucks. There's lots of cowboys and cowboy music and cowboy hats. I grew up playing hockey. Typical Canadian stuff. I have a fairly interesting background, which maybe we'll probe into after, but the long and the short of it is I've done everything from music to working for Apple, one of the largest tech companies in the world, I guess the largest tech company in the world, doing leadership development with them, and trained in Jungian psychology, done cognitive behavioral therapy, positive psychology, and over the last several years, started an organization called ManTalks, and really committed my life to serving men, to helping to build better men, fathers, husbands, leaders, and And really, there's many reasons for that, which I'm sure that we'll get into. But there's this great quote by a man named Friedrich Douglass, who was one of the first African American philosophers. And he said, "It's easier to build strong children than it is to fix broken men." And something about that quote, initially, something about that really hit home with me, because I agreed with it, but I actually fundamentally disagreed as well. Because it was like, yeah, sure, it's easier to raise strong children than it is to fix broken men. But how many of those broken men are actually raising children? How many of those broken men are actually leading companies? How many of those broken men are being abusive to their wives? How do we actually go about fixing or shifting our society in such a way without addressing these guys, without helping these men in some capacity? And I just saw so many guys that were out there that had great lives on paper and dysfunctional lives internally. They had the house, they had the car, they had the relationship, and behind the scenes there was just so much dysfunction, anxiety, depression, burnt out, bored, broken down. And it was having a real effect on their families, on their kids, on their employees, on their community. And I was one of those men at one point. And I realized the impact that I had in the world wasn't one that I wanted to have. And when I really came to terms with that, I started to realize that a worthy mission for my life was to serve and support the men that were out there, because I believe if you heal the father, you heal the family. And that is just such an incredible task to undertake. So that's a little sort of high level, I guess, blip about me.
Wow, that's amazing. And you weren't just a musician too, you were an opera singer, right?
I was, yeah, yeah. So I got a degree in music with an opera major, and I was really fortunate to actually travel around the world. I sang in China, the Czech Republic, Germany, Italy, France, New York, Toronto. Like, I sang all over the place, and really got to see the world at a very young age. And oddly enough, I paid for my music degree by doing construction. So I worked in gravel pits, and I built sidewalks, and I just did these, like, sort of opposing
I was
jobs.
going to say, how fascinating to be in such different environments.
Yeah. So I would literally do construction during the day, and then go to like music school at night, because I didn't know, I didn't start singing until I was 18. And I had no idea. I didn't know the notes on the piano. Like, I didn't know anything about music. I just had a bit of a talent for it, and wanted to pursue it because it was a way out of construction.
That is amazing. What a Renaissance man you are. I'm curious. I love what you said when you're talking about men and realizing that there are so many men out there who their inner world, it doesn't match their outer world, and that you realize that you were one of these men too. When was that time period in your life?
Yeah. So, you know, I grew up in a very interesting dynamic where my parents got divorced when I was 3, and they both remarried other people. And then they both remarried each other in the same year. And then 2 years later, they both had a daughter, and 2 years later, they both had a son, and then they both bought a dog. And so I grew up between these like two family systems that were polar opposite. And I started to see the differences between, my father and my stepfather. And it was quite contrasting. But I really started to see it in my life later on, because, I started to see this dichotomy, this sort of juxtaposition of masculinity in my everyday life, right? Like I said, I would go to construction. I would see these hyper macho, stereotypical, wannabe alpha men that were hurting, that were angry, that were sort of violent. And, a lot of them had addiction problems. And then I would go sing opera at night, and I would see very feminized men, very guys that were very in touch with their emotions. And so I started to see that quite a bit. But where it really started to hit home wasn't until years later, where I started to experience a bit of success in my career. I was traveling the world. I had just a really great relationship with a beautiful woman, and she was an amazing, amazing human being, very talented, very intelligent, very funny. And on paper, on the outside, my outside world looked incredible. I had the motorcycle, I had the Mustang, I had the beautiful, partner who it looked like we were going to get married. Everybody envied our relationship. I was traveling the world, and behind the scenes, I was completely dysfunctional. I was lying. I was cheating. There was a lot of drinking involved. There was a lot of infidelity, and there was a lot of shame, and there was a lot of guilt. And so there was this very real mask of who I thought I was that was being portrayed out into the world. And I had to work incredibly hard to keep that up. And at some point it ended up falling apart, within the span of about three or 4 months. My career started to have some challenges. My relationship fell apart. She found out that I had been unfaithful, and I wouldn't admit to it. I didn't want to come to terms with it. She moved out and away moved in with her brothers. And I was so stubborn. I was so stubborn at keeping up the appearance of this mask, of this facade, this sort of character that I had built up, that I ended up living out of the back of my car for three weeks, because I didn't want to tell anybody that all of this had fallen apart. And after that period of time in my life, I got support and really opened up with friends and family. And I had a great mentor who supported me through that for the next couple of years. And I would spend the next 2.5 years just doing self-study and working with him. And I,
what was that time from that 3 weeks that you didn't want anyone to know to you made the decision to reach out to people? Like, what happened?
Yeah. So, I mean, in that space, it was really like I had moved all my stuff into storage and was just like cramped in the back of my coupe. And I just remember there was a couple of nights where I was just constantly analyzing what I was going to do, like how I was going to get out of this, how I could manage this situation, how I could, either win her back and salvage it, or if I was going to move forward and how I was going to move forward, and how I could sort of damage control my life. And I started to realize in such a clear way that damage control that I had been doing for so long was part of the reason that I was living in the back of my car. And there was a night where this was January, and I'm in Victoria in Canada and living in a parking lot, and so it's cold. And there's just one night where I was looking out of the back window, and I've got a blanket pulled up over me and a pillow, and I'm cramped in the back seat of a car. And I'm 6'2", so the back seat of a coupe is not fun. So I'm sitting in the back seat of my car, and I remember having this dialogue with myself of like, how did I get here? What is wrong with me? And how do I fix it? And I realized that I had been lying to myself and to others for so long, and that no one really knew who I was. Not a soul. Like none of my close friends knew that I was living in the back of my car. They didn't know that I had been unfaithful. No one really knew who I was, right? And so in that moment, I really became aware that there was this inner man and there was an outer man. And the inner man was so fundamentally different from the outer man that I always felt alone. Always, even around people that I absolutely loved and admired and respected and wanted to spend my life with, I felt alone. And in that moment, I remember thinking to myself that I really had two choices. One is that that I could end it all, and that nobody really had to ever know the inner man. Or two, that I could reach out to people and get support and start showing people this inner version of myself that I'd kept hidden for so long. And when I started to do that, when I actually started to reach out to friends and family and sort of share with them what had been going on, a lot of the men in my life, it was like my vulnerability, my authenticity started to become the permission card for them to tell me their inner man, for them to show me their inner version of themselves that they'd been hiding behind the scenes. And it hit home in a conversation with one of my best friends that I had known for about a decade. Where I just told him everything. I just laid it all on the table, everything that had been going on behind the scenes. And he just broke down and told me that he had tried to commit suicide. Yeah, about a month and a half before that. And, it was a very challenging time. I remember thinking to myself, how is it that I know everything about you and you know everything about me? I know what kind of scotch you like, where you like to eat, who your favorite sports teams are, your favorite songs, but I didn't know that you were so unhappy, so dysfunctional in your life that you tried to end it, and you didn't know about that about me as well. And so I just started to see this everywhere, and and I realized that was something that if I could, we as men love problems. If I could solve it for myself, if I could do something about it for myself, that maybe I could help and support other men going through that journey in some capacity, whether they were at the bottom of the abyss, like I had found myself at rock bottom, or they were starting to slide into it, and I could sort of help them course correct and avoid that.
And as you said, like vulnerability is so contagious.
Yeah.
And I'm curious, did you have any purpose of who you chose to reach out to in the beginning? Or was it just you were ready and the people arrived?
Circumstances, actually. So the next day, a woman that I had gone to university with had actually just reached out to me on Facebook and said, "Hey, how are you doing? I heard that the relationship ended." And her and her mom ended up like sort of taking me in, kind of like a little rescue. and, and I ended up staying with them for about a month until I got back onto my feet.
Mm.
And it was healing. It was like being in an environment with a sister and a mom who really took care of me. She was like a typical Italian mom who just made pasta every night, and so that really helped. And then it was a matter of me connecting with my close friends, just a few at first, just one or two that I really trusted, and just kind of letting them know what had gone on behind the scenes, like men that I knew were going to be okay with my truth, men that weren't going to tell me to just go drink my face off because that's what I'd always done in the past, or just go sleep around and it'll get better. But guys that I knew wouldn't try and give me advice necessarily, but that would just have a conversation with me. And that's where I started. And thankfully I had men in my life who could receive that.
Yeah.
So I always tell the guys, is like, if you don't have men like that in your life, then find a therapist, find a psychologist, find a coach that knows this and that can help you move through it, because it can be one of the most liberating things. And I think on your point about vulnerability, Brene Brown says that vulnerability has to be earned. And unfortunately, not everybody in our life has earned our vulnerability, and nor have we earned theirs. It's a reciprocal thing. So yeah, that's where I started.
And I love what you're saying too about that there are some that you can go to, and that there may say just like the go drink your face off,
Yeah.
or versus others who will just hold space for you and be there for you. And sometimes it's hard to predict. I mean, sometimes
Yeah.
but you never know who's gonna be the person. Like, yeah, me too. Just like your other friend that a month before had been in a desperate place.
Yeah.
And that's a hard part of it, is making that judgment call. But I appreciate you sharing too that moment that you were at, or that time at night that you were sitting there thinking, okay, this is me,
Yeah.
and like nobody knows me. Do you I'm going ahead because I want to get back to a little bit put more of your history, but can you do you feel like you know yourself now?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I've done a tremendous amount of work over the last decade to really understand that inner man, and what my outer man wants, what he wants to show. And I was fortunate enough because I had a mentor in my life who had studied with Carl Jung when he was a child, when he was not a child, but when he was in his late teens. And he was quite older when I met him. He was in his late 70s, early 80s. And so during that 2-year period, I ended up studying with him daily and learned Jungian psychology, straight from the man himself. And so that really helped me understand things like the shadow, right? That there's a shadow man inside of all of us, or a shadow woman inside of all of us, and that we have this version of ourselves that we can't see, and that we need to integrate, and that we sort of need to coax out. And so I spent a lot of time analyzing dreams, repairing relationships with people that I damaged, understanding what I truly wanted for myself in my internal life, and my external life started to shape and change based on that inner dialogue, based on the process of revealing what I truly wanted inside.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Not many people get that opportunity. Wow.
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
that's special. That's life altering. I mean, certainly to have that kind of insight. Wow, that's great.
Yeah.
Did, so when you've done this work, did you go back to that woman and have a follow-up debriefing or whatever it would be, or like, hey, or no?
Yeah.
You did.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, we had been together for 4 years, and, after about 6 months, we reconnected and, just talked on and off for probably the next year. And it was nothing, our relationship, I realized in that moment that truly some actions just have consequences that are irreparable, and I think up until that point, I naively didn't see that. Like there was sort of like this naivete that I believed, because I was charismatic and I was good at talking and whatnot. I believed in this sort of like naive way that I could repair anything, that I could fix anything, and I think that a lot of men actually adopt that mentality.
Yeah, yeah. I actually was
Mhm.
going to say that sometimes that is the most important work that I do in working with men, is convincing them that is okay. It shouldn't prevent you from actually facing what we need to face in this, because there's that underlying fear of, I can't fix it, it's permanent, and then what the fuck do I do
Yeah,
with that? How do I face that consequence
yeah,
of it? And so often that's almost the most important part of it, is being okay with with some of the damage, and knowing that you've done the repairs that you can, and you can only own parts of it, and then you carry forth to the next part of your life, but that's
yeah.
not always an easy convincing argument in the beginning of it. So I'd love to go back and ask you, are there other parts in your journey of becoming a man that stand out to you? It can be younger or more recent. It doesn't even have to be linear in how you say it.
Yeah, yeah, that have shaped me. Definitely. I mean, I think like any man, my father figures were incredibly important in my development as a man, and over the past several years, I've worked now with hundreds and hundreds of men, and the theme that I continue to see is that a boy's relationship to his father is fundamentally going to shape so many parts of his life, whether we know it or not. And even the stats on this are huge. The stats on fatherless generations and the impact that it can have on both boys and girls, collectively in their development. But we see a huge impact on boys, especially, right, in terms of dropouts and finishing school, and anger problems, and ADD, and I mean just so many issues. But for me, I sort of had the opposite. I had two dads, right? I had a stepdad. I had my dad, and really seeing the juxtaposition between the two of them. One was this very kind, compassionate man who I didn't really see very often, who was my real father. Um, and the other one was my stepdad, who was this very sort of like uh, hyper alpha, sometimes verbally abusive, physically abusive guy, who was this dominant force in my life. And so there was always this part of me that was trying to understand what it actually meant to be a man. And that dichotomy would continue to play out, right? Construction and opera.
Yeah.
It started at a very early age. And then I had my grandfather, who was just this very sage, wise man, who taught me the sort of, the quintessential manly things. He taught me how to shave, taught me how to mow a lawn properly, because, God forbid you don't know how to mow a lawn as a man. Just simple things like that. And, and
What side was he on, your mom's or your dad's?
on my dad's side, yeah, on my dad's side. And so I had that sort of healthy male role model. But so there's sort of two things there. One is that what I have witnessed time and time again is that a lot of the dysfunction that men have often ties back to their father and their relationship to them. Their mother can have a huge impact, and there can be lots of things like enmeshment, or having an overly controlling mother and whatnot. But the role of the father is so incredibly important. And I think that a lot of men, especially in modern society, often take that for granted or undervalue it. And in my own life, seeing the impact of that has been absolutely essential to my own development and healing the relationships with both my father and my stepfather. And I have incredible relationships with both of them now. You know, my dad and my stepdad are really integral parts of my life. And it took a lot of work. You know, it took a lot of work because one wasn't very much in my life and the other one I didn't want in my life at all.
Mm.
And so it took a lot of healing in order to do that. So, you know, for the guys that are listening, it is well worth it to do the work to repair those relationships and start to see how those relationships have, even if you had a great relationship with your dad, you know, I think that's the thing, is that oftentimes, you know, men are like, oh, I have a great dad, right? I have a great dad. And they start to see how they are trying to become him, or how they're trying to avoid certain parts of him to become their own man. And it's shaping their lives in a way that it's very unconscious. And so doing that work can be incredibly liberating and powerful, and provide a sense of freedom.
And the work that you're talking about with your dad and stepfather, were those conversations with them too?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So there was a lot of conversations, a lot of like sit down, you know, here's what happened in the past. Here's where our relationship is now. Is it what you want? Here's what I want. You know, actually like asking for what I wanted. I actually had to ask, you know, several times from my dad to be like, this is the type of relationship that I want. Do you want that? You know, are you on board with that? Are you okay to talk about these types of things? And inquiring about his past and really wanting to learn from him and understand him in a better way. When I did that, I started to realize in such a powerful way just how unconsciously these two figures had sort of unintentionally, like systematically built part of my identity. And so a lot of the work that I encourage men to do is to really understand their fathers in a different way and heal those relationships, and start to understand the type of relationship they want to have with them. Because that's one of the biggest things, is that so many men don't have the type of relationship that they want with their father, and so they don't have the type of relationship that they want with other men in their life, and it actually stops them from having close friendships.
I've found, I don't know if you've seen this in your work, that when I ask the question of men about their friendships, that it can often mimic the relationship they had with their father. It's almost predictive, not always, but almost predictive of what kind of friendships they have and how much they value that
Yeah.
in it. And that, I mean, you don't hear that very often, but I have seen it a
Yeah.
lot.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's usually where I go first. You know, I have a wide range of clients that come and work with me, and you know, some of them are I seem to attract a lot of guys in the financial space for some reason. But it's interesting because the first thing is, what's the relationship that you have with your father? What's that actually like? And then just looking at the parallels between that relationship and the relationship they have with their friends, and that can be very telling and very indicative, and create a very tremendous amount of change and healing in a very short amount of time.
Yeah, you're right. And seeing like the question that you were speaking of asking and having the gift of being able to ask, because not everybody has a father or their father knew their father. Um, to know the context of what happened to your father to have built him and his journey of becoming a man,
Yeah,
but it's a powerful ask, and it takes a lot of strength and faith, honestly, to like leap in and say, like what you said, like, I want this, do you? I mean, the
yeah,
do you part can just be so terrifying,
yeah.
but important to do that. I admire that you did that. It's great.
Well, because I think a lot of us, you know, men and women, hold resentment and animosity towards our parents because they're not providing us with the relationship that we want, and then we seem to do this thing where it's like, well, they're the parents, they should know the type of relationship that we want, and so we sort of, you know, release ourselves of of any responsibility in actually curating that relationship, and so we're like, well, they should figure it out. They're my mom, they're my dad, like they should know. And then
Yes.
we just sort of like let go altogether, and all that we need to do oftentimes is lean in and say, like, this is what I want, you know, just like with our partner, this is what I want, is this what you want too?
Yeah. And to know you'll be okay regardless of the answer, of
Yeah,
having faith in yourself, that the important part of your work is to ask, and then see what comes with it. And sometimes it takes more than one time. I don't know if that was in your case, but it's, if they're not used to that and they're not ready for it, and whenever they are on their journey, it may be not a great response for a while, but the seed's been planted
Yeah.
for it. So I know you said that you played hockey or around hockey growing up. Did that have any influence, or was that nothing really in your journey becoming a man?
Yeah, I mean, that was a big part of it. I mean, it taught me about competition and working as a team and leadership and just sort of male camaraderie and respect and the dynamics there. And it was interesting because my stepdad was the coach of my hockey team, which is a very unique experience as a child. Like any of the guys that are listening to this, or any of the women that are listening to this that had a parent, as a coach, there's a very unique place for us out there. um, but it definitely had a big part in teaching me about social dynamics, and it's interesting because later on in life, what I started to notice is that a lot of men that play team sports actually carry on in building these competition-based relationships. And so if you actually listen to the conversations between a lot of men, they're very competitive based. And that's why they sort of keep on the surface. And I'm not what I'm not saying is that competition is bad. Competition is a great thing. But what it taught me was that we as men have an opportunity to move our adult male relationships from a competition-based space to a challenge-based space. Because when we're competing with the other men in our lives, like there's a very real thing that we start to do, right? Like when we're in competition with someone, we don't want to show them our weakness. We don't want to tell them how we're struggling. We don't want them to know at all uh, how we might be not performing at our best. And a lot of men are already focused so heavily on performance. Like a lot of our value and our worth comes on our ability to perform financially, sexually, just in our day-to-day life within our health and wellness. And so it can be a huge block for a lot of men that are these sort of like high performing athletes in their youth. And they're used to sort of being like the best of the best, the top of their game, right? Maybe they played rep league hockey or football or basketball, whatever it is. And then they get into their adult world to go through college. That mentality stays with them. They go into the corporate world. That mentality stays with them. And they have, they get married. They have a family, and suddenly they feel very isolated from a lot of the men in their lives. And when they really pull back, when a lot of men really pull back, what they start to see is that in some way they are competing with every single man in their life. And it's always this sort of like dick measuring contest, right? Do I have a better car? Do I have a better home? Is my, partner more attractive? How are my kids doing? Everything is this competition. And the challenge with that is that it creates surface level conversations, obviously, often. And secondly is that it leaves us feeling socially isolated. It leaves a lot of men feeling socially isolated where they feel disconnected. And so the key is to start to move into these challenge-based relationships. How do we actually challenge each other respectfully as men to be better fathers, to step into being a better husband? Well, it requires a certain level of authenticity. It requires having the ability and the courage to have those open conversations with one another to say like, look, my business actually isn't doing that good. It's actually struggling, and my marriage isn't doing very good. We haven't had sex in a year, right? It takes that courage and to lean in and have that conversation. And when we do that, our friends can actually challenge us to be better, to have conversations that we need to have with our business partners or our wives, or whatever that situation looks like. And so that team environment really taught me over the long term how competition actually shapes men, and taught me a lot about male dynamics in terms of our socializing and our ability to connect.
I love how you are then using what the social structure already is, and instead of saying bad, bad, bad,
Yeah.
like let's work. Like we can try to change as we're doing it, but let's work with where we are and use that for the benefit. That's awesome. Well, I interviewed this man named Mike Watts, and he was saying that he read this study of a toy company that was looking at like what are the best words like that represent boys and girls,
Mm.
and using that for how they're going to do toys and marketing things. And for women, for girls, the number one word that came up that described it was love, and for boys it was battle.
Mm.
And that, I mean, here it is, just at a young age, battle,
Yep.
competition, those kinds of words and way of looking at the world and who you are within it is powerful.
Well, and it's such an inherently important part of our life, right? Like where a lot of men start to struggle is when they feel like they don't have a purpose, right? And oftentimes they need to feel like they're in competition in some way, shape, or form, not in an unhealthy way, right? Not in a dysfunctional way where they're, working 100 hours a week and sacrificing every single part of their life, but in a way where they feel like they're expanding their edge in some capacity. They're being pushed in some capacity, because that expansion oftentimes gives a man a sense of deep purpose in life. And so it's a good balance between where am I competing and where am I actually being challenged by other people, right? It's like that saying, it's lonely at the top. It's such a bullshit saying, right? Like I think that it's such garbage.
Yeah.
We allow ourselves to get to the top and be socially isolated because we're not allowing anybody else to challenge us, right? One of the greatest things that I learned at Apple was the higher up you go in the sort of corporate ladder, the more important it is to have people to elicit feedback from, to have people who are, regardless of their position within the organizational chart, to have the relationship with them where they can just call you forward. They can say, like, I think that you're better than this, and I think that you can perform better than this, and I think that, and just give that feedback. But we as men have this like shield up from that because we see each other as like this competition, and so God forbid we give each other healthy, constructive
Right.
challenging, right?
Right. Right. Because then it's seen as criticism. I
Yeah.
love the way you said, instead of calling you out, calling you forward. That's great
Yeah,
verbiage.
that's one of our mottos with ManTalks is like call the man next to you forward into the type of husband, father, leader that he says he wants to be, and who do you see him as being? I think that that's one of the big things is that when we as men can come together and actually start to encourage one another to be better and see the best parts of each other, there's a really incredible strength that comes out of that space.
Yeah.
And that in itself, that's like a modern battle, right? Like we're
Yes.
fighting different wars now, right? We're fighting different battles now. And that's sort of like the new battle for the modern man.
Yeah. Yeah. So where do you think that mentality fits into the world of sexuality?
Ooh, yes, this is good. So um so a lot of the men that I've worked with, a lot of the guys that I just talked to that are, in the men's groups that I run, there's a huge amount of pressure to perform.
Mhm.
And so many of them struggle with performance anxiety, so many of them. A lot of it is because we as men have pornified our sexual encounters. And I mean, 70% of the internet is pornography in nature, it's pornographic in nature. And so as men, we have this huge pressure to perform in a very real way. And that competition, you can hear it in communication amongst younger men, right? There's like this boasting about their conquests. And there's this boasting about, what they've done, or, how many people they've, the notches on the belt, how many women that they slept with or men that they slept with. And there is this sort of competitive nature that starts to enter into that space. The challenge is it leaves most men wanting. It leaves them not feeling a depth of intimacy, and they all sort of know it's there, right? And so there's this sort of like, dissatisfied sense of, well, I got off and he or she was really attractive and it was really great sex, and something's missing. And so I'll just continue to rinse and repeat, hoping that something will change. Einstein said that insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. But we as men do that constantly with porn and our sexual relationships, because we have been just indoctrinated to go out and sort of be these like sexual champions. Not that there's anything wrong with sort of training ourselves in the art of sex and intimacy, but it's so much more than just a number.
Yes. Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then again, and that's also where I've seen men have a lack of space and safety to ask those questions and to talk about sexuality. I've met so many men that want something different and more evolved, but don't really know how to have that conversation without other men. Like, of all the areas of being vulnerable, I've found that like that is almost the worst place, the scariest place, like to say to somebody like, hey, I want to have a better sex life. That most men, even your best, most deep, rich men, are going to be like, oh, and like give you shit for saying it. It
Yeah.
takes special context for that to be met with intimacy itself.
Yeah. Well, what I found is that a lot of guys, you know, men and women have an incredible amount of sexual shame, and the shame that each gender has is a little bit different in nature, based off of, you know, religious context, or just like ethic, you know, just the like culture that they grew up in, or the country that they grew up in. But generally, men have men's pressure that maybe differs a little bit from women, is that performance anxiety, is that performance pressure. And so men generally don't want to talk about the fact that maybe they're in a sexless marriage, you know, and they've had sex twice in the last year, or that they're struggling to get an erection with their partner, or you know, that they feel dissatisfied in some way. And part of the breaking the barrier, yeah, I sort of like, I teach a lot of guys that there's this sort of like one rule of men that we are all trying to live by, and that one rule is that you don't talk about what it's like to be a man. It's like the Fight Club rule, right? One rule of Fight Club is you don't talk about Fight Club. The one rule of men is you don't talk about what it's like to be a man, right? You don't talk about what it's like to be a man that's going through divorce. You don't talk about what it's like to be a man that's sexually dysfunctional, whose wife doesn't want to have sex with them, who's cheating. You know, that's sort of the rule that we abide by. And so the most impactful thing that a man can do immediately to create change in his life is notice one small area where he's abiding by that rule that's creating chaos or suffering, that's creating a dysfunctional relationship or career, and actually just start to uh, take action against it, right? Have a conversation to go against that one rule and start to actually break that rule as a man. It can be incredibly powerful.
I mean, damn, you're right. I mean, seriously, like looking at that one thing, yeah, that's powerful, Connor. You're right about that. Wow. Okay, I'm going to pivot us
Yeah.
from that. Everyone, just sit with that little nugget. And I want to go to what you think of the phrase, like in the name of this series, "Good Conversations with Good Men." What does that mean to you? A good man.
Mm.
What's a good man?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, right? Because I think it's such a subjective quality, and I think that so many women have a different version of this, and I think that the challenge that so many men face, to be candid with you, is that they are trying to fit themselves into the version that women have of them.
Mm.
And so a lot of men have tamed themselves, have become these sort of civilized versions of themselves. They cut themselves off from their primal side. They really have they sort of play small in a lot of ways, because they're trying to be this good guy, and it ends up causing them to sort of be this nice guy that is passive aggressive, that has a lot of shame. That sort of, what's that?
Resentment too.
Oh, yes, yes, that's the word I was looking for. Thank you. Resentment, you know, towards himself, towards his family, towards the women in his life, and so it's such a interesting topic, right? So for me, being a good man is about understanding what it means to be a well-rounded man, right? Not a balanced man, because balance is sort of an illusion. It's like perfectionism, right? It's like one day I'll get to this, and so many men crave this sense of balance, right? There's like programs that are sold to men on like, I'll teach you how to be balanced in your life. And we're like, yes, thank you. Because we want freedom, right? We want freedom, and we think that freedom is going to come through balance.
Mhm.
Um, so, you know, for me, a good man is one who is seeking or aiming to be well-rounded in emotional intelligence, in sexual intelligence, and a good man is one who's willing and courageous enough and brave enough to look at his shadow, to look at his dark side, to look at the dangerous man within, to look at the part of himself that is inside of him that he doesn't want to show people, you know, and that he's not willing to talk about, that he's not willing to bring out. That for me is a good man, because that is a man who is aiming towards healing, who is aiming towards being of contribution, of highest impact and purpose to his family, to his partner, to his kids, to his future, to his community, to his world. And and there's sort of an altruistic air to that, which I know is there. And I think that is honestly what most men are wanting in some capacity, right? They want to be of contribution, of impact. They want to have a purpose in their relationship and their life. And so a good man is one who is looking at all those areas. And a good man is also one who is not threatened by the feminine, not threatened by women. You know, I think I said it in my TED talk. I said feminism is not the death of men and masculinity. It's not even a threat, right? The problem is when we adapt it as a threat, when we see it as the enemy to masculinity, right? Feminism is not the enemy to masculinity. It's something to be understood, right? Just like feminine energy is something to be integrated, right? It's really interesting if you look at, I'll say this last piece and then I'll stop talking because I feel like I just went on like a little rant there. But it's really interesting if you look at like the Spartan warriors, you know that movie 300? Yeah. So the Spartans had this process called Goji, and Goji was the training program that they put men through. And that program was in the morning, hand-to-hand combat, then fighting with weapons, learning how to fight as a team. And then the afternoon was teaching them dance, teaching them how to write poetry, teaching them how to sing, teaching them how to be a man of valor and respect and a man of God. And so these, you know, some of the most incredible men of our time have been men that have sought out all different areas and avenues of life, not just of what it means to be masculine or manly, but what are the feminine qualities that also he can embrace and understand and seek to know as well intimately.
Hmm. So would you say that would you prefer conversations with well-rounded men versus good men, or like, does it hit you differently? Or
I think to be candid with you, I think that men that are aiming at being good men oftentimes close themselves off. They need to then become this man that is inherently good, that is, and they create a mask around that, right? It becomes a form and a part of their identity. It's like, I need to be a good man, and I need to prove to people that I'm a good man. I need to prove to people that I'm flawless and that I'm without you know, these dark spots in my life and these failures. And it sort of starts to shape their identity in such a way where the act of being a good man is more important than actually being a good man. And
Mhm.
so that's where it's challenging, because I have met a lot of good men, and a lot of truly good men aren't trying to be good men. They are just simply going about um, being as authentic and honoring their intuition and honoring their authenticities, their flaws, as much as humanly possible. And in that way, they are doing the thing, right? They are being the good man rather than sort of portraying and being this character, because we can fall so quickly into taking on that character, you know, and acting rather than being.
Did it, I mean, I'm making an assumption that you identify with being a well-rounded man. Like, that's identifier that you would take on, or
Um, maybe, yeah. I mean, I think being a well-rounded man is important, and not sort of going too heavily to one side versus the other. I think one of the challenges that a lot of men have that I've seen is that we tend to gravitate towards extremes in our identities as masculine, right? And so the quality of men is usually like they will identify strongly as a Republican, right? As like a staunch conservative Republican, and that will make up their whole construct of what it means to be a good man. And that will oftentimes close them off to any other information, anything else that could support them in their growth and their development and their expansion. So I would say that how I identify is more of as a man of expansion. What will expand me? What will constantly expand me and push me out past my edges? And that's more important than trying to aim at being well-rounded constantly, because sometimes when and if I'm going to expand, there's probably a part that I'm not well-rounded in. There's probably some area that I'm just absolutely horrible at and that I'm missing out on. But if I'm open to seeing that, then I can expand in that area.
that is so fascinating, you that use that word, Connor, because I've been working on this, I don't know, theory or whatever, of like the different, not the different, but different types of men. And
Mm.
it started with my work within sexuality, but it's become bigger after doing the series. And I couldn't figure out, like, first of all, I didn't necessarily like the highest, like that there was going to be this, like, oh, like this, but I mean, but there's always a hierarchy. And I was trying to name them to make it more like soundbitey to understand what they were. And I was trying to think of the higher level, and it was enlightened slash expanded. And I was leaning towards expanded. And I just love the way you said that. It's a verb, it's a noun,
Yes.
it's understandable. And it's, to me, I almost heard forgiving in it. It's this generous, forgiving, growing, that's a part of it. Anyway, now I'm on my tangent, but I love that word. It really fits with the men that I've been talking with and what we're striving for too.
Yeah. And I'll just say one quick thing on that, because I think you have another question, but I teach a lot of men. A lot of men are looking for purpose in their life. So a lot of men come to me, whether they've built up some success and they're looking for their next chapter, or they're just trying to find, what's next for them in some capacity. And purpose is such an ambiguous thing. But one of the things that universally so far I have seen that lands with all men is interchanging the word purpose with expansion. And so I teach men that there are three energies to purpose. Two of them destroy purpose, and one of them creates purpose. So there's the energy of contraction, which a lot of men fall into when they're avoiding, when they're lying, when they are not being authentic to who they are and what they want, with whether it's ethically or morally, or in their relationships or sexually. The next energy is the energy of stagnation. And so when a man reaches a place where he feels like he's reached this sort of plateau, he's created some success, some stability, some order in his life, he'll feel very comfortable there. But if he stays in that space for too long, if he doesn't continue to expand in some capacity, it'll very quickly lead him into contraction. And that energy of contraction is often what leads men down into the abyss, down to the rock bottom, because they continue to lie and avoid and not address the things that they really need. And then the final energy, the final stage is that energy of expansion, because it requires us to have courage and bravery and have uncomfortable conversations and really explore our inner caves, right? And face our own demons and dragons. And there is something so richly rewarding in that. And when we as men don't do that, and I'm sure that this is the same for women, but I'm not a woman, so I can't necessarily speak to that. There's something so inherently rewarding to that it gives our life an inherent meaning, right? It gives it an intrinsic purpose. And we feel like we can expand out sexually, relationally, emotionally, within our intelligence. And it's incredibly fulfilling.
Hmm. Hmm.
Yeah.
Yes. All that. Yes.
All that.
All that. Yes. So do you think there's a difference between, and I'll just go back to the word that I was usually using, a good man versus a good human?
That's a good question. That's a tough one. I think that there are some core tenets that make a good human, that also make a good man, that also make a good woman. And those are things that are sort of universal. The pursuit and the embodiment of love as often as humanly possible makes a good human being, makes a good man, makes a good woman. And when we can embody some of these core tenets and traits, it almost is interchangeable. I do think that there are some things that differentiate between a good man and maybe a good human, although maybe I'd be hard pressed to identify what one is, because it might be wholly interchangeable. I think the slippery slope, to be honest with you, is that we all want to identify as something, right? We all want to identify as something, and men want to be able to identify as a strong man, as a good man, as a it's important to a lot of men, just like a lot of women want to be able to be a good woman or a good mother or a good business owner, whatever that is. And oftentimes we sort of demonize these labels, right? And we sort of have entered in this space of ambiguity within genders, where there's this movement to eradicate any notion of what it means to be a man or what it means to be a woman, when the reality is that those things exist, and they exist in nature, and those polarities are important to our existence. And when we destroy them, it can oftentimes be incredibly confusing. And so a lot of men are are in some ways, some of the guys that I see and work with are lost simply because they have rebuked and rejected everything that it means to be a man. And it's challenging for them because they are a man. Like, they biologically are a man, and yet they are trying to reject everything about it and just be a good human. But that's far more ambiguous for them, and there's this pull within their psyche to still be a man in some capacity, and dishonoring that if that's what's true for them. If it's not what's true for them, then they can ignore it. But if it is what's true for them, then the dishonoring of that is an inauthenticity, and it's a lie, and it causes them suffering, because any lie is going to cause suffering. And that's where I always come back to.
Mm.
Yeah.
And I've seen too, like that. I mean, that's such a good point. And I've seen men struggling and feeling that lostness of feeling like society has, or in our era, has taken away what
Yeah.
they valued, what they previously defined as good as a man. And now what? What I like, they felt good. Like, I've checked off the boxes. I've done what you said to do, to be good, to be whatever. And now you're telling me it's bad, it's wrong. So what do I do now?
Yeah.
And what does that look like? Again, the lack of purpose and direction in that. And resentment because it was taken from them instead of it being a purposeful journey in it.
Well, and that's a dangerous thing too, because then you give men something to fight for. Right now you've given them an enemy. Right now you've given them an enemy of masculinity, and
Yeah.
that's a dangerous thing. Right, just like it is to try and take that away from women. Right, to try and take away feminine qualities and say you can't do those things. I mean, women have been repressed and oppressed for so long. Right, their sexuality, their the values and the virtues that they embody, and there, I think Nietzsche said something along the lines of intercourse without equality, or yeah, intercourse without equality is never is never good intercourse, right? Because we crave this equality of polarity. We crave this equality to be able to meet one another within that dynamic, whether we're gay, whether we're straight, whether we identify as a man or a woman, or however we identify, we still crave that, right? And so to take that away from men is to threaten them in some capacity, and
Which
that
triggers
just
the
that
battle, triggers the
yeah.
competition.
Yeah, it triggers that primal part of our monkey brain that's there, and it's just like that doesn't work.
No.
We know it doesn't work, but we keep trying it. We keep trying to take away men, because men have been a threat, right? Men have hurt people. They've gone to war. They've killed, raped, pillaged, the whole gamut. But trying to take that away, trying to take away that infrastructure of masculinity in men, that's not the answer, right? That's just going to create more opposition, more battling, more resentment, more shame, more guilt, more lostness. And now we see things like incels. I don't know if you are aware
Oh
of that.
yeah. I wrote an
Like,
article. It was part of an article in the Evening Standard about that.
yeah, like, holy shit, and this is a part of that deconstruction of men and masculinity, and demonizing men, both from men and women, right? Like, this isn't, women aren't just, it's not like I'm trying to blame women, or anybody should blame women. Like, this is men and women,
Yep.
right? That we have all sort of collectively started to deconstruct what it means to be a man, rather than say, what's it like to be healthy? What's it like to have healthy masculinity?
Yes.
Right, and be a healthy man that's of contribution to the world, right? That can fight for equality, and that can take a stand for equality, and love, and everything that we want, everything that we desire.
Mhm.
Yeah.
It's not many people, I think, understand what you just said about that there's equality and polarity, that it almost seems inherently disconnected. But when you get that, and again, like we were talking about before we started recording, about the having men at the discussion of how things are going to be changing with the Me Too movement and everything, that we cannot have it just be one-sided. It has to be. We have to have all genders at the table to
Yeah.
understand that, to understand each other, to have the same kind of verbiage and philosophy, and to have the differences, so that we can incorporate the differences as much as we incorporate the similarities into the shift that needs to happen, and actually is happening with it.
Hmm.
So again, I'm going to pivot. I know that you're in a beautiful relationship right now, and I'm curious, what do you think in a relationship, for those in a relationship, what does a man need in his spouse, his relationship, his partner, to support this expansion, the well-roundedness, the good manness of it?
Yeah, I mean, first and foremost, I love this question, by the way. My fiance is a marriage and family therapist as well.
Oh, wow.
um, so I know all about the IFT and marriage and family therapy, and it's beautiful. It's a great thing. Um, yeah, I mean, I think the first foundational piece is that a man has to be willing to question his own core tenets, and he has to be able, willing, and open to take responsibility for his own life and the impact of his own life. There are a lot of men who have been taught generationally that, unfortunately, that it is, like, if things are broken in a relationship, that it's the woman's fault because the relationship is the woman's job.
Mm.
And that's fucking garbage. It's such bullshit. It just totally is, because we as men then sort of let ourselves off the hook. It's like, well, this is your domain, right? This is your domain, so you should figure it out. And it creates that resentment and that animosity. It creates a powerlessness within the man, where he sort of shirks off any responsibility, and he doesn't have to be responsible to his partner, right? He doesn't have to be responsible. And even in homosexual relationships, this shows up, right? I work with a lot of gay men who are really struggling to find a long-term, healthy, monogamous relationship because they crave it, right? They're really desiring it, but their culture doesn't necessarily allow that for them. So the first step is really, are you willing and open to take full responsibility for any dysfunction in your relationship? Like, are you actually ready to do that? To be able to take a hard look and say, okay, we're not having sex. How am I maybe responsible for that? Without shaming yourself, without sort of like tearing yourself down in such a way that produces more dysfunction, but in a healthy way, to say, how might I, to be curious, right? To deploy curiosity and say, how might I be responsible for this dysfunction? And then the second thing is that, I'll speak to a heterosexual relationship because I'm in one, and I don't want to make presumptions for the other side and what those other relationships look like, while I love and honor them. I don't want to speak for people in those dynamics, but men generally are craving vulnerability and openness and realness and authenticity from their partners, and and especially from women. And
Are you saying that they're craving for for the woman in their life to be vulnerable with him?
yes,
Okay. Mhm.
yes, like, men desire it. And it's interesting, I've seen this, sort of shift within a lot of women of like, I don't need a man and I don't need a partner in their life. And that sort of narrative is running in the background, and it actually prevents sometimes them from being able to open within a relationship in some capacity. And again, vulnerability is earned, right? So if your partner hasn't earned it, I understand that, and finding out where it's safe. But that's part of what a man is really looking for in the relationship. The other part is that he's looking for a function and a purpose. And oftentimes in modern relationships, um, that can be challenging, because men are always like, we're pretty much always looking for, like, how do I fit into this situation? How can I contribute? How can I impact it? How can I either solve or fix it? And a lot of communication problems come out of that, because we're just listening from this space of like, okay, what are you trying to tell me that I need to know so that I can fix this as quickly as possible so that you are okay?
Mm.
And um and so men are looking for a purpose. So oftentimes what can be very helpful is actually communicating to our partners, like, if it's in a homosexual relationship or in a heterosexual relationship, communicating to us as men to be able to say, okay, right now I just need you to listen. I don't need you to try and fix this. I don't need you to try and find a solution or whatever. I actually just need you to listen and maybe ask some questions. And again, deploy curiosity in this moment. Um, and I think the last thing that I would say is that men actually need to check their own views of performance within a relationship. what I have noticed in working with men over the past several years is that whether men communicate it or not, they have a constant scoreboard going on in their relationship, constant. And they are generally keeping score of whether or not they think that they are doing well in the relationship or losing in the relationship, or whether they are owed by their partner in the relationship. And again, that competition that we talked about before with their friends starts to creep into their intimate relationships, and now they're in competition with their partner. And that is it's a very dangerous space, because then again, they withhold vulnerabilities. They need to win, they need to be right, they need to prove a point, and they cut themselves off from having the depth of intimacy that they're really craving. Because all men are craving intimacy in their relationships, healthy men and men that are wanting to be healthy and wanting to be in that space. They really are. They're wanting that connection. And that's one of the biggest challenges that they face, is that they'll oftentimes be keeping that tab, that score constantly open, that ticker that's running. It's like, is she doing this? Am I ahead? I did the dishes, should she do this? And it's constantly there behind the scenes,
Yeah.
keeping tally, and then it causes arguments and fights. And so the best thing a man can do is call himself out on his own bullshit and say, like, you know what, I wanted you to do that. I had expectations because I've been keeping score. And when he does that, he can free himself from the burden of needing to compete with his partner, regardless of the type of dynamic that he's in.
And what about in speaking to again, we're just speaking to heterosexual couples, to women who are wanting to support, to create an environment, or what she needs to bring to the table to support a man who's operating at this level?
Yeah. So there's a few things. I always say that women are like these beautiful permission card holders for men who are willing to do the work.
Mm.
And that is time and time and time again. The majority of my clients that come in and work with me, the first question I ask is, how did you find out about me? And their answer is always, my wife, my girlfriend, my sister pointed me in your direction. I'm like, okay, cool. So it's so true, right? Like, many men, they might not have the type of men that are in their lives that are going to give them permission to, go see a therapist, or get them the book to, you know, get them the No More Mr. Nice Guy, or whatever the book is, that's going to buy them that resource and support them in their growth and their expansion. So that's a part of it. The second part of it, I think that was a question what women can do or how they can show up. I just want to make sure I'm
I
clear.
like how can she show up? Like,
Yeah. Yeah. So, again, coming back to that Nietzsche quote around the intercourse and equality, is that every man is looking for, in some way, and I think every woman maybe is looking for their complementary opposite, right? This sort of person that they can be challenged by, that they can have their edges pushed by just a little bit, not too much, not so much that they feel like they're constantly failing and never winning. But really, women who are willing to be grounded, be calm in their stance of confronting men, of challenging men. I think that a lot of men are looking for that dichotomy, for that juxtaposition in a woman who is sensual, and who has a softness and a sort of like vulnerability to her, but also this sort of like fierce side where she's able to say, enough. I will not stand for that. I will not tolerate that behavior. That's a non-negotiable in my relationship. And 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 a man that really respects his partner is going to respect that, and he's going to feel pushed and challenged in it in a way where he will be exhilarated by it. He'll really be like, oh, okay, yeah, all right, I think I crossed a line. Because oftentimes what happens is that a lot of men aren't being stood up to. They're not being challenged by anyone, not their friends, not their family, not their partners. They have free reign. They're smoking pot all the time. They're, sleeping in the morning. They're just a freaking mess. And nobody's challenging them. Nobody. And they are desiring it. They're craving it. And so, when a woman can show up and be that sort of, finding the times to be soft and strong, right? I think that there's something totally just deeply beautiful in that, and desirable as well for a lot of men.
Hmm. Hmm. I know you had an article too that it reminded me of. I was reading it about, I think it was about commitment, when a man's ready to commit.
Yeah.
And there's some of that in there too. And it was such a powerful, actually, I thought it was such a powerful article. I really thought you had some really great points with it. And in reverse, it almost seems like it was the way of having a woman understand that,
Yeah.
that too. So I thought that was a really insightful article. Okay, so I'm going to throw some words at it too, and just whatever comes to your mind. Protector,
Hmm. Grounding.
provider,
Direction.
connection,
Intimacy.
vulnerability,
Hmm. Erotic.
love.
Everything.
Nice. Good. All right. So my last few questions for you, actually just one question, is in, let's see, you're 35?
Yeah.
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 Yeah. So you're 80. And somehow we're probably like a hologram or something. We've turned this video of us interviewed, and we're together watching this. And what would you like, as we're sitting there together watching back of us talking from almost 50 years prior, what would you like to think of this man today, your 80-year-old
Hmm.
self?
It's a good question. I mean, I think first and foremost, no one likes watching themselves on video,
Yeah,
whether they're being interviewed
yeah,
or watching themselves in sports. But no, I would want to look back and have a deep respect for myself, in this space, to be able to look back on myself and really look at who I am today and say there was a man who was doing his absolute best in every way, in every sense of the word, who really was focusing in on contribution, being an impact, being a loving, strong, present, grounded man, and who was, to the best of his abilities, trying to make an impact in the world. And I would want to hopefully look at the man that I am today and think, man, what, like, I have learned so much since that age, and continued to grow, and looked back on this age that I am today with hopefully the same sense of humbleness and humility that I look back on myself when I was a teenager and in my 20s, and hopefully look back on myself and say, like, you were doing a great job, and just with such pride, just a sense of pride in myself.
Oh, it's beautiful.
Yeah.
Great.
Thank you.
Connor Beaton, thank you so much for your time and your thoughts. Thank you for your gifts that you're putting out in the world. And thank you for being a good man.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Man Made Conversations with Good Men. If you are interested by what you heard, please press the like button and comment in my YouTube channel and subscribe to the series. We'd also love for you to comment and share on social media platforms. If you know a good man or are a good man, contact me at drjulianamorris@gmail.com. It's DRJULIANAMORRIS@gmail.com, or let me know of your recommendation in the comment sections. Thank you for joining the Conversations with Good Men, Man Made.